In this video, we're going to talk about states, layers, and triggers and what each of those things mean. And I've pulled up a slide here that has a pretty good representation of all three. So let's start with states. I'm going to go down and select the Timeline States Notes section, and that will expand the window on the bottom. And then I'm going to select our States option. But let's first define what a state is. A state is a characteristic, if you will, that you assign to an object. And when you assign that characteristic to an object, it really changes the appearance of the object and makes it feel more alive and interactive. So for time's sake, I've already went through and I've already assigned states to each one of these buttons up here at the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and select on this primary button. And as we can see, each one of these buttons has multiple states assigned to it. So this primary one, for example, has a normal state, and this is what it's going to look like before the learner interacts with it. And the next state we have assigned is a hover state. And we didn't really do anything very dramatic here, but when the learner hovers over this particular object, the color is going to change slightly. Next we have a down state, and that's what's going to happen whenever the learner clicks the button. And lastly, we have a visited state. That's what the button's going to look like once the learner has visited this particular button. Now let's preview this so we can kind of see this in action. Alright, so we're going to go up to their preview button and select this slide. Okay, and when we hover over this particular button, we can see it change color. And conversely, we can do that with the other ones and they will do the same. Next, if I click down on this, you're going to see it change just a little bit. The only thing we've done between the hover state and the down state is we added a white border around the object. Alright, so when you select it, now you can see what pops up down here underneath. So this obviously is a click to reveal. And now that we've visited this particular button, it turns gray. And we can do that with all the other ones, and they're going to do the same thing. So again, all a state really does is it changes the appearance of an object to make it seem more interactive. All right, let's go back into Storyline and look at layers next. So layers are really great in the fact that you can add multiple pages, if you will, or layers to this particular slide without having to create additional slides. And as we saw from our example, each time we selected one of the buttons at the top, it revealed some information underneath. And again, that was done through layers. And let's just real quick take a look at each of the layers. And the layers, we can see those in the slide layers window down in the lower right part of the screen. Okay, so if we select our primary layer, we can see that it dims out the background or the base layer. So all we added to this layer was the black outline box. We added this graphic right here, and we also added this little black line to make it look like it's connected to the primary button. And again, we just repeated that for each one of these layers. So the secondary layer, same thing. We have the graphic, we have the box, and the line. We do the same thing for main charge and for the pyrotechnics layer. So basically, layers just give you the ability to add a lot of content and a lot of interactivity to one slide. Alright, so let's click back on our base layer again and talk about triggers. So we have to bridge the gap, if you will, between the state and between the layer. So the state's going to show the learner, hey, there's something going on here, there's more information. The layer is going to provide that information once the button is selected. But the trigger is what, again, bridges the gap between the two. So let's look at our triggers up here in the trigger window, and that's in the upper right-hand part of the screen here, as you can see. And I'm going to go ahead and select this first button. And when I select this button, it will highlight the corresponding trigger over here under the trigger window. And if I double click on this trigger, it's going to open up the trigger wizard window, and from here we can basically select the options for this particular object. So as an example, in this case, what I wanted to do whenever the learner selects this primary button, the action I wanted it to take was to show a layer. Alright, and let me just click on this drop down menu again. You can see that there are a lot of actions that you can assign to an object. We're not going to get into those right now because, again, this is just a general overview of states and layers and triggers, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in another video. But again, that's where you would select the action. You're going to select the layer that you want to assign, And what it does, it lists out the layers. Now, this is why it's extremely important that you name everything that you're working with, that you name all of your objects, and in a way that you can specifically understand what that is. So if I did not name these layers and I came to this part, I wouldn't really know, which layer belonged to which should belong to this particular button over here. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, it's very important that you name everything as you're creating. So next is a when drop-down menu, and this is relatively self-explanatory. This is basically just going to decide when the action is going to take place. In this situation, we assigned when the user clicks this button, it's going to show a layer, and it's specifically going to show the primary layer. All right, so we're not going to really change anything here. I'm just going to click OK. But that is the relationship between states, layers, and triggers.